Okay, so welcome to our session, No Justice Without Knowledge, Levelling the Field for Science Journalism, organised by the World Federation of Science Journalists and SciDevNet. I'll hand you over to our moderator, Edwin Naidu.
Good evening, everyone. As Ben suggested, would it be possible to move a little closer so we can have a better conversation when the conversation starts flowing? Maybe I'll give you a minute to come closer so we don't have to be spread across the room, if that's okay with you guys. So maybe in the middle. If you're there, you're fine. I won't bite, promise. So, good afternoon and welcome to the session. I think it's been a long day and I know there's parallel sessions going on. And we're here this afternoon to have a conversation where we're talking about different issues related to how new technology is making science journalism more powerful. So we have our panel. I'll introduce you to the panel shortly. Just some background. I'm with SciDev.net Impact Editor. Ben Dayton is our managing editor who was on the podium just now. And we're a global news content agency or organization interested and passionate about science and technology, telling stories and working with journalists throughout the world in expanding these stories. So I think in terms of the context, we know that scientists and scientific knowledge has been widely praised for helping to combat the COVID-19 pandemic and its consequences through the discovery of vaccines, but also, keeping societies and the economy going. We've also seen during this time rejection of science, rejection of scientific outcomes, restrictions on the work of scientists. And still, you've got many like UNESCO arguing that the right to do science must be defended as part of the quest for human rights and equality. I think increasingly over the years, or last 2 or 3 years particularly, we've seen public trust in science and scientists being eroded by poor or inadequate communications. Insufficient funding has also been labeled as a threat to science, as well as unequal access to science for women. COVID-19 particularly has shown up the underrepresentation of women in science. And according to UNESCO, only 35% of students in science, technology, engineering, and maths in higher education globally are women. So women are also scarce in leadership and management. I must say, one of the interesting articles I came across in recent times was Beyond Cheerleading, Navigating the Boundaries of Science Journalism in South Africa. And while it's a very South Africa-based journal article, it has relevance for Africa and the rest of the world. They spoke about the major issues that media is facing as a result of what we've seen, what we've experienced over the last 2 or 3 years. And of course, there's been economic pressures, there's been a shrinking of resources available for news, and you've also seen the rapid rise of public relations. So, in a sense, you have PR people doing the work of journalists as well, which is or can be considered problematic. So I think, we want to interrogate how science journalists perceive the impact of these changes on their professional roles. Allow me to introduce you to our first speaker who will take a few minutes to talk about what we want to look at during the course of this afternoon. Her name is Milica Momcilovic. She's the president of the World Federation of Science Journalists. It's a multinational charity dedicated to advancing science journalism and communication through a wide variety of activities with universities, governments, NGOs, to promote standards and the role of science journalists as key players in civil society and democracy. Ms. Momcilovic holds the position of editor in the science program at Radio Television of Serbia, RTS, and she also writes for the popular science magazine Elementi and Politica. She covers life sciences, medicine, health, climate, climate change, new technologies, and more. Over to you, ma'am. Sorry, we can't hear.
Up. Is it better now? Okay, something happened. So I'm really glad to be here with you, and I can call you friends. And I like that this session is going to be actually the cozy one, because it's not the full audience, and just last night here was the opening ceremony and full. Thank you for the introduction. It's pretty thorough one, and what I can say about Federation is that it's a unique organization in the world, that we have a UN constitutive status, that we represent 70 membership associations, professionals all over the world, and mostly Global South, which we are proud of. And more associations are looking for membership in the Federation as we speak. Before the pandemic, our goal was, as you mentioned, to promote standard in profession in science journalism all over the world, and that's mainly education and networking. But since pandemic and during the pandemic, we realized that we need really to reflect on our profession much more, since we were faced with different difficulties. We were faced with difficulties in reporting on science. It was not easy. Suddenly, science journalism was #1 journalism in the world, in general media, not just in a specific. And I need to say that in Federation, we have over the 50,000 professionals who are actually practicing journalism for general public. That means that they're reporting for different media outlets, being broadcast, being print, being radio, but it's for general audience. Just a very small percent is reporting for Science and Nature and other specific scientific papers, news outlets. And there is so many languages that our colleagues are reporting on. And during the pandemic, science journalism and science journalists, they were at the opening there, like the first ones first responders when the pandemic started. But there was another thing that since everything happened so fast, there was not enough of us to do the quality reporting, because as we all know who is practicing science journalism, we know that we need time. We need time to prepare, we need time to fact check, we need time to find an expert, we need to find credible sources, so that takes time. And during the pandemic, what happened is misinformation and pseudoscience was all over the place. And we tried to do as much as we could in our outlets, but it was mainly like 15% of what we could do in this tsunami of information that was all around the place. In Federation, we were trying to reflect on what's going on and try to find a way how we are going to improve ourselves in this difficult situation, in completely different environment that it was before pandemic. And we also did a little survey. Surveys are always good when you want to find out how your field is changing and who is part of your community. So in our conference in Medellin, which is going to be end of March, World Conference of Science Journalists, end of March in Medellin, Colombia, we are going to present the results of our latest global survey, which was closed on August 2022. And I can share just a couple of informations about that, because we are still, in a way, under embargo with this. But the thing is that our position on profession changed in terms of practicing the science journalism. Now the majority of our community is actually practicing science journalism. Also, majority of our community is a staff journalist, so they're employed, which was not the case a couple of years ago when we did another survey, and SciDevNet did one just before pandemic, as far as I recall. So suddenly there was a really important, we felt that our profession is really important, so we really tried in our outlets to make us out there and try to find the way how to communicate what's science journalism and what's general reporting. And we also tried to help our colleagues, journalists, general reporter, to have trainings to try to find better ways, because they're also staff, they're working under pressure, they need to deliver for their editors, and they're not skilled. For us, it's very important, the skill, education, and with science journalism is always learning, always improving. You need to know the new tools, you need to improve them. You also need to improve yourself. You need to connect with other people. And you need to be always on top of your game. I would stop here, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think, key takeout there is global associations, global bodies where journalists belong to are very essential. I think it's important to consider being a part of it because there's unity in strength. And thank you very much, Melissa, for that informative account. And we now move on to our next speaker, Ristyo Boytchev. He's a Berlin-based science and health journalist with a focus on data-driven and investigative reporting. He's worked as a reporter for the nonprofit newsroom Corrective and as a freelance medical and science journalist for Nature, Science, and Der Spiegel. He's a project leader of Follow the Grant, a data-driven tool for investigating conflicts of interest. Ristyo has a master's degree in biology from the University of Dresden and journalism from the University of Madrid. He was awarded a European Science Journalist of the Year Award prize by the European Federation for Science Journalism in 2021, and also graduated from the German National Academic Foundation Science and Journalism program in 2011. He was also with the Washington Post as an F. Burns Fellow in 2012. Over to you, Ristyo.
Which microphone? Thank you so much for the very nice introduction and the opportunity to speak here at this amazing forum in this very intimidating room. The forum, of course, has the topic Science for Social Justice, and I'm going to speak about how investigative journalism maybe can contribute to science for social justice, and more specifically, data-driven investigative journalism into research integrity. So I'll begin to talk about our project, Follow the Grant, that was mentioned, named after the motto of in journalism, of course, follow the money. Here we follow money in science, so we chose the name Follow the Grant. And it's, as mentioned, a data-driven investigation approach into conflicts of interest in science and medicine. Just to introduce the topic, you don't have to read anything here, but just to show that this field is very well researched and established, namely that conflicts of interest in medicine and science are an important issue. So a typical conflict of interest in medicine would be when a doctor prescribes a medication, not based only on evidence, but for example, because they are also being sponsored by a pharmaceutical company to go to a nice trip, or have a speaking fee. So this fee is influencing them, and then it presents a conflict of interest. And it's a huge issue how to deal with these conflicts of interest, because they are so ingrained in medicine and also science in general. And so from journalistic point of view, investigating this topic, conflicts of interest, is important. There have been many high-level investigations, and here I want to single out this one because it's important later for our work. So this is a page one story in the New York Times about this one cancer researcher, very prominent cancer researcher. And what the journalist did here is to basically go through his publications and analyze what conflicts of interest are being stated under each publication, because this is required. Medical journals require this transparency, and they found that in many of his publications he hadn't actually given his full conflicts of interest. And so this is one researcher out of many. So our question, together with my colleagues that did this project, Follow the Grant, was, okay, can we actually make it data-driven? Can we make it scalable? Can we find many more scientists and not one single researcher? And this is actually what we set out to do. Basically, we collect, this is how this works roughly, we collect these conflicts of interest statements from scientific journals, put them in a database, and then can do analysis. We can automatically find contradictions, for example, that exactly like the example given. We can find that maybe one scientist has given sometimes a conflict of interest, but many other times not. And just to make it a bit more tangible what the data is, so this is a conflict of interest statement. This is how it looks like. This is from today, a random article I found. Basically, medical journals require this field, competing interests, and then you immediately see this, okay, this is a paper about COVID vaccines. You immediately see that some of the scientists do have heavy, let's say, conflicts of interest with pharmaceutical companies. So basically, we just collect this text and make it searchable and do also a language analysis. So this is the concept, and now fast forward 3 years, and like a lot of money invested and a lot of hours spent. So we actually succeeded. So with funding from different journalistic foundations, because we are all freelancers, I was responsible for the content, and Simon Würpe and Edgar Alvarenga were the actual data journalists doing the programming. So we analyzed 15 million scientific articles and could then find 5 top German doctors that in dozens of cases each hadn't disclosed their conflicts of interest. So let's say 5 times what the New York Times had done for this one researcher. And of course, in the data, there are many more, but we chose these 5 because they were kind of the most high impact from the data we had. And so right now, this is an ongoing project. We are expanding it to COVID-19 research specifically, and also environmental science. And we're also working on a global focus because these stories were in German. But of course, the data we're analyzing is global, so we can do stories on different countries and in English. And I think that basically this approach to actually data-driven investigations into research integrity can be expanded also beyond this single topic of conflicts of interest. And here's an example by colleagues. So I wasn't involved in this, but I think it's a very interesting project. A couple of years ago, by International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, they also looked at scientific publications, analyzed scientific publications, but they looked for predatory publishers. So predatory journals, as most of you know, are journals that pretend to be peer-reviewed, but are not, so everybody can publish there and pretend to be a scientist maybe, and maybe fool somebody to give them a nice position or advance in their career. So you can, of course, analyze who publishes there, and this is what the colleagues did a couple of years ago. And I think this is a very promising, actually, approach also in the Global South. You know, you could look up, are there at your local university or in your country maybe prominent scientists that are publishing in these junk journals, and why they're doing that. So yes, if you have any questions about tips, how to do this, or just want to get in touch, I would be very happy to do so, and otherwise, very happy to answer any questions later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ristio. That was very illuminating. I think definitely very exciting to look at how this can be scaled and the Global South can benefit from using this research to interrogate what's coming out of science a lot more in depth rather than just reporting on the general. For example, in South Africa, during COVID, all we got was looking at the PPEs, looking at tenders, but there's so much more that one can interrogate using this. So very exciting and certainly something to consider. We look forward to your questions later as well. Our next speaker is Ogechi Ekenyanwu. She is an award-winning Nigerian journalist and regional coordinator of SciDev.net's English language African edition. She is my colleague, I'm proud to say. She has pioneered the development desk at the Cable and conducts in-depth and solution-based reporting on development issues in Nigeria. Ogechi is also a passionate child and women's rights activist and has worked as a consultant with Mind, a non-governmental organization that focuses on urban poor women. She edits our podcast, Africa Science Focus. Ogechi, over to you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So my name is Ogechi, and I'm going to center my narrative around why science journalism is important in Africa and how to deeply engage the scientists and the work that they do. I'd just like to say it can get very cliche to talk about the role of journalism in the society, but good journalism does keep people informed. As situations unfold, it helps people make better informed decisions, and this role cannot be underplayed. Also, it's important to engage the science and the scientists because the knowledge that the scientists have need to be democratized to impact the society positively. There's no emphasizing that scientists, their research, the science that they do and the technology are key to socioeconomic and cultural development. They shape policies, or they should shape policies and influence lives and people and development. So this is why it's important for us in Sub-Saharan Africa, at the SciDev.net, for instance, and just generally, it's important to us to do science journalism in a way that is foolproof, to engage scientists and to engage their work deeply in a meaningful way. And one of the reasons that we know it's important to do this, especially with the proliferation of the internet, social media, is because the internet, as we know, is a double-edged sword, particularly as we speak in terms of information. On one hand, knowledge is democratized. Everybody gets information easily and can share it, and it will easily go viral. But on the other hand, that's the issue of misinformation, disinformation, fake news, news that's unverifiable, that becomes so easy to spread on social media. And when these kinds of news get out, it affects lives, it puts people at risk. And there are several instances, talk about in Nigeria, for instance, or in West Africa, where there were issues of fake news around salt, solving the problem of COVID and other kinds of things, and people took that in large quantities, and what happened was that it became another issue, another public health situation to deal with. And then we know in other parts of the world, we can talk about how the use of chloroquine was supposed to cure COVID, and then that led to hoarding, and because of that hoarding, people who needed it for certain other ailments that needed to be used for chloroquine, I mean, they struggled with availability of that particular drug. So when fake news spreads, really, people's lives are at risk, and so it's a net negative. And fake news can really lead to hysteria and emergency situations. So, which is why we work closely with scientists to basically help share the knowledge that they have, make their knowledge publicly available to everyone so that people can make informed decisions. And so that as these things unfold, for instance, with COVID, it was a new situation, and it was obtaining knowledge about the new disease really was so crucial that oftentimes there were mistakes made. But working with scientists to correct what wrong information was put out it's really important. And so we also talk about the cost of not following the science. So let's take the case of monkeypox, where African scientists who had experience in managing the disease were basically sought after for global collaboration and research on monkeypox. And so for us, for science journalists, really, it's important for us to give our scientists the opportunity to present the research. I mean, without the knowledge from these researchers who had prior knowledge of the disease, people would have been probably groping in the dark. And so it was helpful to hear from scientists who had knowledge about the disease and to just basically come up with guidelines on how to manage that disease. In terms of technology and how we use it at SciDevNet, for instance, we're currently experimenting with new media. We have a podcast, it's the African Science Podcast. We have a TikTok channel, and we're currently trying to reach out to new audiences, the younger ones, the younger generation, for instance, that would typically not read science news because they may find it boring. But we're constantly experimenting with ways that we can present that news to them, accurate news, factual news, verifiable news, in chunk size, bit sizes that would appeal to them. And so we have our TikTok channel, we have the Africa Science Podcast, where we center the voices, because it's of African scientists who work under different situations, sometimes the most difficult situations, but present science that provides solution to the challenges that the region faces. And so that's what Africa Science Focus is about. That's one way that we use technology to share science in easy and understandable ways. So it's important for us to understand the problems that we face in our region and how science and technology and innovation needs or meets these needs. And so that's basically all that's really my presentation or my speech for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ogechi. That was excellent. I think, underscoring why science journalism is important in Africa. Good journalism keeps people informed. The role of science cannot be underplayed, and it's important to engage science and scientists, and this knowledge needs to be democratized. And I think Ogechi is right. They shape policies and influence lives. And research definitely has to be credible and evidence-based. On the subject of TikTok, I think a lot of us are still getting used to it. I must just share with you that Ogechi experimented with it yesterday with Ben, and our first TikTok from the World Science Forum, we produced about 5. Each one had about 500 views. So, this was the first time we've experienced TikTok without having to dance. So maybe there's a positive there. So our next speaker is Lee Mtwiti. He's the chief editor at Africa Check. Lee was previously deputy editor at the Pan-African focused Mail and Guardian Africa, and a senior Africa-focused writer at the Nation Media Group, that's East and Central Africa's largest media house. Lee holds a master's degree in international studies from the University of Nairobi, a bachelor's in biomedical sciences, and a certificate qualification in journalism. Over to you, Lee. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. As you heard by way of introduction, I am Lee Mtwiti, the chief editor of Africa Check, the continent's first independent and non-partisan fact-checking organization. So we are headquartered at the Department of Journalism at Wits University here in South Africa, and we have 3 other offices in Senegal, Kenya, and Nigeria. This allows us to make a wider sense of the information landscape on the continent. So we work to promote accuracy and honesty in public debate and in the media in Africa. And through this, we seek to strengthen democracy and improve life outcomes, as we believe that poor information contributes to poor decision making. From our experience over the years, we have learned that it is not enough to point out singular instances of misinformation. And I use misinformation as a catch-all phrase for disinformation, malinformation, what is popularly known as fake news. And to solve what really is a complex problem of misinformation, we adopt a multi-pronged approach that also focuses on media literacy, focuses on training, on engaging stakeholders, and nurturing other fact-checking organizations on the continent, of which there are now about 30 from just ourselves in 2012. So we marked our 10th birthday this year. In keeping with the social justice theme of this forum, misinformation disproportionately affects the most vulnerable in society and has outsized consequences for the marginalized on our continent. And as the president said yesterday in his keynote address, knowledge is a public good. Following from this, we at Africa Check believe that accurate information is a social good that informs the decisions we make in our everyday lives, such as those concerning our health, as we have heard from some of our panelists, and also our safety. Accurate information is a key pillar in the fight against poverty, in the fight against unemployment, in the fight against inequality and exclusion. Some of the panels before us have already examined the role accessible science language plays in informing and empowering the public, and in bridging the gap between research and policy, and making science work for those of us who, in low-resource settings, especially in Africa and other regions of the Global South, have to contend with. So today as Africa Check, I want to focus on another type of resource challenge, where the resource in question is data, and the barrier is the cost of the humble megabyte. Now, Africa has an internet penetration of only 43%, about 600 million users as of last year, compared to a global average of 66%. So most of the continent we are in accesses information through the mobile phone. And so then the question then is, how can we get the most vulnerable in society to spend what is obviously such a vital resource on accessing accurate information? In 2019, a brilliant research consultancy in Kenya released a report known as The State of Mobile Data. If you want to look it up, it's by a vibrant organization based in Nairobi called NENDOS. And they found that if you give the average Kenyan 1 megabyte of data, they will spend it on what they called the 5 S's in this order: on search, so Google, on sports, essentially betting, sex, social media, and on stories. So we want the vulnerable to search for and read accurate information more than they spend, for example, on betting. Based on our work and experience as Africa Check, and in keeping with what I was asked to speak about on this panel, I thought of looking at the challenge of providing accurate information through the lens of 3 types of information seekers in Africa. So I said the first category is those for whom data is not a problem, who I call the Uber connected. We have a lot of those in Africa, despite what you'd think. There are a lot of people who data is simply just not a challenge. The second category is for those whom data is carefully monitored. I would suspect most of us fall in this category. And these I dubbed the somewhat connected. And third, those who are offline. And these are the vast majority in Africa, despite the advances that we have seen in recent decades of internet penetration. I'll give an example of some possibilities around each based on what Africa Check has been doing. Starting with the Uber connected, we've all seen the meteoric rise of the short-form video hosting service owned by the Chinese company ByteDance, and Ogechi has spoken of how you've been experimenting with TikTok. And this service tends to attract, including in Africa, perhaps especially in Africa, the affluent, those who are based in urban areas, and the more educated users. For example, a third of all South African users of TikTok are in Gauteng province, so that's 33%. But just 0.75% of South African TikTok users are in the province of Limpopo. Last year, TikTok penetration grew 46.4% in South Africa, 21% in Kenya, and 15% in Nigeria. And I pull up these statistics because these are the countries we work in as Africa Check. And this was against a global growth average of 58.4%, telling us there really is more to come in Africa. The most followed account on TikTok in South Africa has 16.5 million users. And I was looking at it the other day and just posts possibly the most inane of things. But the following is amazing, and it's very easy to spend a lot of your time just keeping up with its exploits. We see several US doctors who are celebrities on the platform. But if you search for Nigerian doctors, if you search for Kenyan doctors, if you search for South African doctors, you get very limited returns. So this, in my opinion, is sad because TikTok and such emerging social media platforms are a great way of reaching the youth who, as we have heard during this forum, are critical for the future of science. Why are we in science in Africa so rigid? A lot of TikTok accounts in the global north disseminate and explain science in such engaging ways using such platforms. And as I said, even I as an editor and with a science background, I find myself whiling away so much time on what I thought was really the latest fad for teenagers. So as an example of some of our work on the platform, last year we partnered with influencers on TikTok to raise awareness around the prevalence of COVID misinformation. And we had such great reach and engagement and appealed to younger audiences that we normally would not have been able to reach out to. So can we not do the same with science in Africa? Can we not explain complex scientific processes in such fun ways? Perhaps food for thought. The second category I mentioned is the somewhat connected. I speak specifically to WhatsApp based on our experiences. And there are an estimated 50 million WhatsApp users in Africa. And the messaging service is the most popular in South Africa. Sorry, is the most popular in South Africa of all platforms with about 8.3 million users. And Nigeria, surprisingly, I would have thought there would be more, 3.3 million users, and Kenya, 3 million users. Now, WhatsApp is encrypted, so it gives us qualitative data rather than quantitative data. And but we do know it is peer-to-peer and hugely networked. So it is very useful for signaling what is traveling in communities and for dissemination of scientific information, which is then shared with family and community networks, including the unconnected. We've got a project that we launched in 2019 on WhatsApp. And I was listening to the panel that was here before us, and there was one impassioned gentleman who said there's a lot of crap out there when it comes to science, and the tragedy is governments are listening to it, right? So in 2019, we launched our appropriately titled podcast show, What's Crap on WhatsApp. The emoji is one of poo, probably one of the more identifiable emojis when it comes to fact-checking. And we send it out twice a week as a voice note show. So first we ask people to subscribe to it and send us the misinformation and they're seeing in their networks for us to fact check. And then we send our findings back to them twice a month. But we also engage our 5,000 subscribers so far weekly, and getting that many subscribers is not easy because they have to opt in to the service. But also, it's a professionally recorded voice note show. So we go into studio. We have a partnership with a podcasting company, and then we go and record our answers, and then we send it back to the subscribers. And what this means is that users are sending misinformation they're seeing in the networks to us, and we're sending it back to them on the same platform. And they don't have to leave the platform because, once you have a click that takes you out of a platform, it becomes very difficult to retain your audiences or your users. And also, it's very light on data. So, I did mention that, it's somewhat connected. You're monitoring your data use. You do not want to use a lot of data. Keeping up with misinformation or keeping up with developments in science generally. So this allows us to crowdsource misinformation that would otherwise be difficult to monitor and to understand and analyze misinformation. So it is now an award-winning show for which we have created a handbook should anyone want to replicate the concept. My key message for the Somewhat Connected is that we need to leverage the unrivaled rich such peer-to-peer networks as found on WhatsApp provide. And lastly, the unconnected. And I know we've been speaking about new technologies, but my view is that it's the existing media that really are we need to work with in science. And I'm speaking specifically about radio in Africa. Radio remains king in Africa. Wherever you go, you'll find that it has unparalleled reach and an ability to tap into local culture that few other emergent technologies have. But the challenge then is to find creative ways of engaging audiences around science on such an already existing platform. In 2021, that was last year, we launched an interactive, or rather 2 interactive radio dramas in Nigeria in the Pidgin language and Senegal in Wolof, which were aimed at vaccine misinformation. In short, we started with a drama, so we've got a cast of actors we were working with, and they would play out a role in a scene around misinformation, and then we would invite audiences to replace the main character, right, and say what they would have done differently in that scenario. And also as they go about it to interact with other actors on the radio shows. It was a very participatory approach, and its anonymous nature helped pull in marginalized audiences. We also brought in experts and built into the radio drama elements of media literacy, which we think is the future. We want to create a critical mass of people who interrogate the information they come across quite critically, and it's probably the more sustainable approach to fact-checking rather than knocking back a claim one at a time. We've had very impressive call-ins by listeners, and our evaluation, in our evaluation rather, a lot of them gave us anecdotes of behavior change, which really is the sort of impact we're all looking for. Due to time, I'll say in conclusion that it is important to know your audience, especially for us here on the continent. to follow them where they are, whether it's in TikTok or whether they are listening to that radio set on their, holding it as they're heading, and also to assess where they're accessing the information from. And from a social justice point of view, to adopt inclusive bottom-up approaches that seek to speak to people horizontally and not vertically, as science is often wont to do. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Lee. So I think, accuracy and honesty in public debate in media in Africa and throughout the world is critical. I think you raised a very key point there on data being a barrier. And of course, we know that ministers often talk about that. The costs are prohibitive. And that's why only 600 million people have access to the internet in Africa. So I think you're right, TikTok does attract the affluent. And as media, we face a challenge in addressing that and making sure that the vulnerable are not left behind, or else the fourth estate becomes a tool of the elite. So I think it's time to move on to questions and let this be an interactive debate rather than us talking. So if anyone has questions, put up your hands, please identify yourself and address it to the panel member. I will try and get your mic, I think. Okay, sure. There is a mic there.
Thank you. My name is Michael Achia from Mauritius. The last speaker mentioned 5 S, sport, sex. I didn't get the last one. I just wanted to ask you which was the last S. On a serious note, there's been a number of people who have worked on like sort of a declaration to declare access to internet or to Wi-Fi as a human right, a right to access. And I think scientists like in World Science Forum could support such a declaration, because with that, then it'll make governments and others like obliged to do so. Because it is, in fact, access to food, access to energy, is fine, but access to information through Wi-Fi. So I just wondered whether one could, again, reconsider that proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to add to that there is a draft declaration available for comment, and there's 5 key questions there. Science for human dignity. What role for science in fighting poverty, unemployment, inequality, and exclusion? Science for climate justice. How can science working with civil society lead the way in correcting the failure of climate policy? The third is science for Africa and the world. How to unleash the potential of African science in global cooperation. The fourth is science for diplomacy. How can science reboot multilateralism and global solidarity? And the fifth is justice in science. How to ensure science reflects the society we want. So these are some of the questions that are addressed. But should you have a question, ma'am, you? Yes. I think there's a mic. You've got to walk to the microphone. Yeah.
So my name is Marina Joubert. I'm a science communication researcher at Stellenbosch University. I wanted to thank the panel members for a series of really interesting insights on science journalism and also innovation in science journalism, and also reflecting on the status of science journalism in Africa. And I just wanted to, I couldn't resist. It doesn't happen that often that you come to a session and then somebody mentions your research paper. So I was one of the co-authors on the paper for Beyond Cheerleading. And I thank you for mentioning it, because I think it's really important for us to do research also here in South Africa about science journalism and science communication and the tensions between institutional science communication and science journalism, but also how they can work together. So I just wanted to make use of the opportunity to thank you and also to invite people who are interested in research and taking these ideas further to get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. I'm glad that you're here, and I think I was reading your journal article earlier, and lots of questions in there. So if anyone would like to see a copy of that, please get in touch with Marina. She's here, or me, and happy to share it with you. It raises questions on journalism and the challenges and how to go about reporting post-COVID and the issues. So, but any other questions? Our panel's waiting for you. Hi.
Hi, my name is Mohammad Hampana. I am a freelance science journalist. First, I'd like to thank everybody here. They mentioned a lot of good points. As you know, science journalists don't have many opportunities to point out their challenges and problems. What I'd like to ask is your thought on the problem of educating new science journalists. As you know, we don't have many opportunities all around the world to educating new science journalists. This is the problem. This is a general problem almost everywhere. We are seeing a decline in number of publication in media-oriented, science-oriented media, and universities doesn't really care about science journalism. They more care about science communication, and without any means, we can't really have new generation. So I want to ask about your thought in this case. Thank you.
Malaysia, would you like to have a pop at that?
Yes. In short, yes. What I like to say before addressing your question is that I'm a member of steering committee of the World Science Forum, so the declaration, and this is the first time that someone who represents science journalists sitting at the same table with all interesting parties, and we are talking about this declaration that Edwin just mentioned. And I would really like to ask you if you have time to go over that and put your comments, because it's online and we are going to have a finalization of that document tomorrow. The other thing, because we flied in a group of journalists from an international group of journalists, 15 of us here at the World Science Forum, and Christio is one of them, and some of you are in the audience. We participated at the other closed-door deliberation of Cape Town Declaration for Social Justice. And this was also the first time that I can say surely that fair part of science journalists were represented there, and we got even time to put our thoughts into it and in that document and how it should be shaped. I think this is very, I find this as a milestone in a way for our profession, because we really need to make line what's science communication, what's science journalism, but also what is media. Because, okay, we work for media, but we are different, we are science journalists. And where we publish our articles, that's media. And that's not, in a way, our responsibility. We can't be responsible for global media. Okay, we have a role, like we have a role in society. That being said, in these discussions, we also focused on education. And we put the same question as you did about opening special departments for science journalism, because this is very important. That's a COVID thing that we learned during the pandemic, that how important it is to have a quality science journalism in media, and how unprepared we all are for that. I'm hopeful that this is going to be moved in a second, in the way that we all want to, and have in some parts of the world they already exist, but I think that's not enough. And also I'm thinking all the effort that Africa is doing, and how because we all do handle trying to find a way how to reach our audience, what tools we should use, how we can be out there more with putting their accurate information. But also what we need to do is to engage with the traditional media. The radio is one of the best. Radio, everyone listens, and this is a nice thing. But it's, science is not that well represented in radio. And that's the issue for management of this media. So communication on this high level, it's very important. So what we are trying to do, and I'm going to say my punchline here is proud of a community that we are, because we are on an individual level, we are working what we can in our environments, but also on global level, being a part of the federation, I see that there are movements and that we can sit at the same table and talk and listen and communicate and try to find the best possible way how we can be better, and how we can, in terms of social justice, how much we can do.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Any other questions? Sure.
I'll be very quick. My name is Sonabon Ngelwanda. I'm from the University of Cape Town.
Hi.
I just want to ask one question. In democratizing knowledge, you may just ask, to what extent do we think about language? Because in many, I mean, if you look at people from rural areas, for an example, and the research seems to have revealed that English is not their language. And the assumption you are making here is that by using English as a tool to communicate science, we are reaching a huge audience. I just want to get your perspective on the tools that we use to democratize knowledge. And of course, I agree with the last speaker that the radio is indeed a king or a queen in terms of reaching in terms of a bigger audience. But even there, I'm wondering to what extent does the lack of use of indigenous language deprives a lot of people that access to knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Solomon. I think I'll hand over this for this to either Ogechi or Lee, but just to add that yesterday at our SciDev stand, we met someone from a website called SciBrai, and she mentioned to us that they publish articles in English, Afrikaans, and Zulu. So I know that needs to be done on a much wider scale. It's happening in limited spaces, and it can happen on a much more bigger scale. And as SciDev.net, what we've done as well is shared our podcast with the stations, radio stations, and given them the opportunity to translate it in the vernacular across Zambia, even Malawi, and different parts of Africa, and offered it also to the SABC education stations and said, you're free to use this content and use it in one of the official languages. So I know it's considered an expense, but it's necessary because these are official languages. But if Ogechi or Lee would like to add to that.
Okay, so I agree that language can be a huge barrier in, distributing knowledge, especially when it comes to getting news, science news to underreached, underserved areas. And I think it's something that we must give deep thought to and come up with solutions. I think some of the solutions, like Edwin was saying, really, is to produce content and give the opportunity to local radio stations to translate to the to the communities in a way that in the language that they understand, in the language that is in use in the community. I do agree that it's something that we have not really had, robust discussions around, and that we must start giving, in-depth thoughts and in-depth thoughts to. Yeah, thank you. So thank you for your observation, and it's something that I do agree that we need to continue to have conversations around.
Thank you, Ogechi. Yes, up to you.
Just to answer the gentleman, DSI and SASTA is currently having a kind of system where they hire different interns in different provinces who speak different languages, and they place them in different radio stations, newspapers, even television stations to translate science news in their indigenous languages.
Thank you very much. Good to hear that. I think that's what we're talking about when, interactive and, you're answering our questions from the floor as well. So we're looking forward to other questions. I just want to ask a question to Aristio. You know, is it not problematic to focus on the negative side of science when science is under threat? And is it, you know, not counterproductive to criticize science in a way? Do you find you get negative criticism towards your data-driven investigations that lift the lid on things that may be unsavory?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Interestingly, I think COVID changed this a little bit for some time. I also had done a lot of investigations into alternative medicine, kind of charlatan medicine, and kind of fake treatments. And there I was working with a scientist that was an expert on this. And when we did this conflicts of interest investigation and published it, and I asked them to maybe promote it, share it in their network, you know, they said that, you know, she respected the work very much, but she was afraid that in this time when there's this controversy about the COVID vaccines and what is science, and we should trust science and we should not question science so much, you know, we should just go and follow it in this crisis. So she was very hesitant in that time, and it was very interesting to me. But I countered that, you know, we need to do exactly that. That's what, you know, science sets. That's what sets apart science from a system like, you know, charlatanerie or conspiracies and so on. That when you criticize it, it should be able to respond to these criticisms. It should be able to reform itself, to better itself. So in the end, it is also in a service to science. And I don't think at any time we should stop this as journalists. But yes, there was nervousness, let's say, about this issue.
Thank you.
I would like also to say, okay, we are reporting on science. That means that we are really into science. But also we have an obligation to the audience. And I think that we need to think about this balance. And in this case, I think, did you have in mind the audience and the importance of reporting that to the audience?
Yeah, of course I have always at first the audience in mind, yes. But it's interesting how people respond to this. And I think during COVID there was this science establishment, let's say, they were more sensitive to outside criticism than before, and maybe now after.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? I'm not seeing hands. Maybe my sight is bad from here. But sure.
Hi, Orakanok, I'm from Thailand. I have a chance to work with a policymaker in my country, and we learned that in order to promote science, he often urged that we better promote our science. For instance, the COVID-19 vaccine. The research has been ongoing, but not yet completed, and he urged that let publicize and do the PR via the newspapers or so on and so forth. And as a journalist, how do you view this with the fact that it's still ongoing? The research is still ongoing, not yet completed, but the politicians would like to want to the public and their citizens to be aware of the advancement of science in the country. And how would you like to address on this? And I would like to hear the feedback, because sometimes we pay the newspapers and the media to publicize this, but the fact is still kind of uncertain. Thank you.
Would you like to take that one?
Could you shortly paraphrase the question, because the acoustic is extremely bad from at least where I sit.
Okay, so I think basically how do you publicize, or were you trying to talk about how to publicize science through the media and the interventions being used to spread the message, basically? Did I interpret that wrong?
when the research is not yet completed, right? It's still ongoing, like the COVID vaccine is still ongoing, but the politician would like to publicize in the news, in the media. As a journalist, how would you address this with the fact that it's not yet there? Thank you.
That's a tough one during the COVID. It was really, we were trying to track how many research papers were, there were so many research papers when you're looking at that, and you have a deadline when to publish the story. So at some point you really need, if you're going to put the number, the next day is going to be inaccurate. So if you're working for daily. This is also with the vaccine and the others, but you need to, it was a necessity to report almost every day. So there are some couple of sentences that you usually use when to make that accurate, that this information is not evidence, it's ongoing, it's going to be more. And of course, since there were so many thousands of research papers, there are not all so good, and that's another thing, and not all the experts are very credible. And this was going on in a local environment, that we were the same thing as the global. So in the Federation, what we did during the COVID, we asked to partner with WHO and just to have press briefings for science journalists. And that was something that we found very beneficial. It was not just on COVID, it was on all the other health issues that we wanted to cover. But that was really a chance to have our community all over the world, speaking so many languages, reporting on so many languages, to be direct in touch with the expert from WHO, a couple of experts, because they couldn't, each of them, writing to the communication officer, asking for that expert. It takes time, and so we tried to make it efficient for all. That worked very well because these stories are ongoing stories, and after that we could pick up with a local expert and follow-up story in the local environment. I find this approach very, very good because of the quality of content and validation of information that we published.
Thank you. So we've got three. You go first, so let's go.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
My name is Yusuf, and I'm from Nigeria. My question is pertaining the fact-checking. I just want to know whether do you create any awareness, especially for those people living in the rural places? Because I think, especially in a place like me, there are still some places that doesn't seem to know about media or know how to use media in order to sense messages. So do you guys create any awareness for especially the people like that?
Probably Lee, would you be able to answer whether fact-checking reaches all parts of Africa, rural, urban?
Absolutely. That is part of the, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's it's the other side of the digital divide. We've got that knowledge gap between, urban areas and rural areas. And we've tended to find that organizations that work in, the rural areas, your community radios tend to be the least underfunded, right? And this tends to be the best place to understand the local needs of the society. And some of the funding that we've been looking for is to capacitate those kind of institutions that are ensconced in the community to better respond to the concerns of the audiences. I always go back to say that the key to bridging this divide, and one person mentioned it, is going to be making access a human right. Right. As long as we have people with preferential access, then we'll never really overcome that gap between the people who really need the information that science generates and the scientists ourselves, right? it's something that continues to really, occupy us. I think the key always is collaborating with the community, with the leaders, with the institutions in those societies that can at least, speak in a language that the people who really require that information are able to access, and understanding how information and misinformation, in our case, flows in societies, away from our ivory towers, away from our sandboxes. I don't know if that helps.
Great. Thank you, Lee. So Marina, and then the gentleman.
I just wanted to say something very briefly about the need for critical science journalism versus, celebratory kind of stories. And I mean, of course, it's good now and then to write a piece about an achievement or a so-called breakthrough or something like that. But I think in South Africa, in line with the idea that we don't have that many opportunities for young journalists to become trained, to gain confidence, it's quite difficult for young journalists, in my experience and from talking to them, to become, to take that role of a critical journalist, to challenge a scientist in an interview, to ask more critical questions. It doesn't, just happen overnight. There's often a power difference between, the level difference between the journalist and the scientist. And I find that scientists are sometimes quite surprised when journalists do challenge them or ask critical questions. So I think that's one of the things that we need to do more to help scientists understand the importance for journalism, and that they're only doing their job when they do ask critical questions, and that it doesn't mean that they're disrespectful or out to get them, or that there should be a breakdown of the relationship if they do ask critical questions, but to see it as a positive and constructive thing, and to understand that role of journalists as well. And it's something that we really need to talk more about, especially also with research active scientists. So maybe I applaud journalists who do that and take that role.
Thank you. I think that's all about bridging the gap between journalists and scientists and ensuring we're telling stories. And I think that's what we committed to as journalists in general. Can I take a question from the gentleman, and then maybe we can have statements to sum up?
Thank you. My name is Kalk Mouton. I'm a recovering journalist. I currently work for Wits University as a communications officer, and we've spoken a bit about the tension between science communication and science journalism. And as Marina would tell you, here in South Africa, we really, really struggle with science journalism. And one way that we at Wits University has tackled this problem to communicate our research is to put out a research magazine, Curiosity, which really tackles social issues and the issues that we struggle with today in a critical manner. So it's a Wits University publication, but it's by no means a PR vehicle. And what I think I'd like to say is, as a response to the decline in journalism, I think it might be an idea for institutions themselves to take a similar role in distributing their own critical information in a very transparent and responsible way to get to communities out there. Because as we know, the journalists are really getting junior in the newspapers, in the media, or at least in South Africa, and they don't ask the critical questions. And so for Curiosity, we work with senior journalists that really go out and ask those difficult questions. And we've seen, even in our community of researchers at Wits University, there's a lot of diverse ideas and even highly contested ideas. So we do things like face-offs. One researcher says X about this topic, and another researcher that sits across the hall from him or her says Y. And we put it against each other. So I think institutions, research institutions, can also go a long way into critically interrogate their own work and put it out there in the community.
Great, thank you very much for that. I think very good pertinent points there, and I must say, based on that, it also depends on the leadership of the institution giving you the freedom to be critical. On a lighter note, I remember once, maybe a decade ago, there's a particular vice-chancellor who, they had an in-house magazine, and this is the way not to do it. So they published the picture, her picture on the cover. She shouldn't say gender. The person didn't like the picture, and they scrapped like all 10,000 copies. So vanity mustn't get in the way of good stories and critical journalism. So good, thank you for those points. Would each of you like to give us a summing up comment in closing?
I would like to say that I really support that the institutions need to change their opinion about giving the information. And it's not the close thing. They need to communicate their science to the public because of the fundings, because of the whole system. Most is taxpayers' money that is going to those research. So this is something that they would really need to be much more there and in communication with journalists to do the best for the public, to put accurate information there. And I think that we are on the same side there. We are not the ones who, yes, we are the fourth estate, but we are on the same side on giving information to the public.
Thank you. Risto?
Yeah, I would mirror that in a way with what we've heard. I think it's crucial, maybe as appealing to journalists, yes, to ask the tough questions of scientists and be brave to do so, because they're not asking these questions for themselves. They're asking these questions for the public, and also yes, for scientists to understand that and not to be put off by this, but understanding that even this critical process actually anchors science in the democratic system and safeguards that there are checks and balances on a scientific system. So I think yes, we both professions have to can learn there a little bit more and more.
Okay, as these conversations flowed, it occurred to me that one striking question really is how do we get the science to underreached, underserved communities? And I think that as journalists, we must bear the burden of continuously reporting the inequities, the inequalities in access to science, to scientific knowledge. We must bear the burden of reporting and then, putting that, setting the agenda and holding the government or, the government accountable for provision of these sort of facilities or whatever it is that these underreached communities need to access science, to access new knowledge that will help, develop those communities.
Thanks, Lee. All right, and I would say, for me, the takeaway is to really understand our audiences and to keep them front and center of our work in science. We must follow them where they are, right? If it's the young generation which is on this platform that we as science think is not serious enough for us to be, we are losing that audience and we are losing a generation and we are losing public support. So it's very important for us to speak to audiences in languages that they understand, if we are going to get the vital public support for the very important work that we sink so much resources into.
Great, thank you. So, Science for Social Justice, it's both a responsibility and an opportunity and a commitment. And on that note, the World Science Forum has committed to be guided by the values of Ubuntu, that is respecting the universal bond of sharing that connects all humanity, and to working together to harness the power of science to achieve the ambitions of the Sustainable Development Goals. I think in summary, we as journalists want to tell stories. We want to make sure that we bridge the gap between journalism and science so that the greater public understands what's happening, how it impacts on them. On that note, I'd like to thank you for attending. I think we have one more question before we close. Sure, or comment. One for the road.
I've summarized that idea of access to,
sure,
and I've sent it to those who are doing the declaration.
Okay.
Read as follows: declare access to information and communication. Declare access to information and communication, Wi-Fi, internet, as a human right, in the same way as access to education is. So I've set it out.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think in the absence of any further questions, I'd like to say thank you. The panel is going to be here if you want to engage for a chat even afterwards. But thank you for attending and wish you well over the next few days of deliberations. Cheers.